What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and we're going to continue on our Unearthed Arcana Playtest Packet 7 TLDR. For those of you who don't know what TLDR is, it's too long, didn't read. It's an internet term, but basically what I'm doing is condensing down. This is a very long document. There's a lot to cover, and I covered it in a 5-hour live stream live with all of you, but people want parsed down smaller versions, so I'm breaking it up into specifics. We already covered the weapon changes. This time we're going to talk about the spell changes. There's not too many here, but one of the big ones, possibly the most impactful, is a big change to Counterspell. You're going to have to see how you feel about it because it's a big shift. But a lot of the other changes I think are all good, including some reversions of newer updated spells going back to their 2014 version. So before we dive into that, though, I want to talk to you about the sponsor for today's video, Ryoko's Guide to the Yokai Realms, a 5e tome. As you can see right in front of me, it's absolutely destroying its funding goal. So, high level, what are you going to get inside here? A gargantuan monster fighting system. We're talking about kaiju stuff here, right? 5 legendary kaiju monster hunts. That's pretty awesome. 50 plus yokai inspired monsters. There's an elemental bender class, right? We'll look at the art. You know what it is, but it's a full level 1 to 20 class for that. 12 plus subclasses. We've got a bunch of races, 70 plus magical items. 12 plus, it says ninja prosthesis, right? Think Sekiro, right? Ninja prosthesis. New spells, and then a party combo mechanic. There's also a ton of free preview stuff for you to download. For those of you who are wondering, PDFs are looking to be delivered, looks like April of next year. And physical books will be later, possibly into the following year, depending on printing. And printing is still an issue here. But here you can see the Elemental Bender, right? I mean, take a look at that. That art looks fantastic. Of epic magic items. There's some really awesome dice included here. These Jades dice look phenomenal. I love that look. And there's a preview of races here, of 2 of the monsters here, and 2 subclasses, as well as a playtest adventure that you can just download right now for free for just going to this. By the way, there will be a tracking link at the top of the video description, as well as the pinned comment if you'd like to check it out. Thank you to Ryoko's Guide to the Yokai Realms for sponsoring this video. Let's talk D&D Unearthed Arcana Magic. So, here we are looking at the spell section. This is a reminder to get the Unearthed Arcana now. You have to go to D&D Beyond, and then you go to Sources, Unearthed Arcana, it takes you here. So, let's go ahead and read the design notes about the updates. Probably one of the biggest updates is they have completely annihilated this concept of spell lists, right? We had the Arcane, Divine, and Primal spell lists. Those they've decided to get rid of. And I really feel like I kind of liked the concept of it, but then they started tweaking it and adjusting it to the point where it didn't make sense anymore, right? So first they said right out the gate, and again, this is part of the iterative process of this playtest where they're like, okay, we're going to hit you with this, and then we're going to see what sticks, what people like, what people don't like, and we'll adjust. So we had the Arcane, Divine, and Primal spell lists, which were obviously you can figure out what gets what. Right, Primal is your Ranger, your Druid, Divine is your Cleric Paladin, and then Arcane is kind of, everybody else. So they were doing that, and that was okay. So, basically that meant that anything a Paladin had access to, a Cleric would have access to. So Clerics now have Fine Steed and things like that. But then they started adding, in the more recent ones, specific spells. So they're like, okay, the Paladin uses the Divine spell list, but they get Fine Steed specific. That's a specific Paladin spell. Clerics don't get it. And I was like, well, once you start adding specific spells to a spell list, it kind of defeats the purpose of the spell list. You make that the way I would have done that is if you want it to be unique, you make it a class feature, right? And we saw they kind of changed Divine Smite for the Paladin to be a spell now, as opposed to just be an interaction that you have. I'm not really sure how I feel about that. I kind of don't like it because technically it means Divine Smite can be counterspelled, which I don't particularly like, but they changed counterspell, so we'll take a look at that. But yeah, it's just, I'm not really sure. I think if you wanted to have these 3 specific spell lists, you would just make Fine Steed a class feature as opposed to a spell. But they've decided to go completely back to the way they were kind of in 2014, where every class has a specific spell list. I think that that's fine. That's what we're all used to. I do think some classes are going to lose out on a number of spells they would have had, but that's fine. All right, Arcane Interruption. This is one of the sorcerer-specific spells we had right here, which was a 4th level spell. As you saw, it did basically an explosion. It was essentially like a sorcerer-specific fireball that allowed them to do a damage type of their choice: acid, cold, fire, lightning, poison, psychic, or thunder. And it was based on a Constitution saving throw. It did 6d6, and then the other unique mechanic was when you choose one of the d6s, and it would apply some sort of status effect to the creature. They have changed that from a Constitution saving throw to a Dexterity saving throw. That's fine. It makes sense. It's like a fireball. It makes sense. All right, here's the big one: Counterspell, right? Now, if you look at it, it's right here above my head. Level 3 Abjuration, that remains the same. It's on the Sorcerer, Warlock, Wizard spell list. Reaction, which you take when you see a creature within 60 feet of you casting a spell with verbal, somatic, or material components. That's pretty much the same. 60-foot range. You attempt to interrupt a spell in the process of a creature in the process of casting a spell. The creature makes a Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, the spell dissipates with no effect, and the action, bonus action, or reaction used to cast it is wasted. If that spell was cast with a spell slot, the spell slot isn't expended. It's interesting because, one, it used to have this concept of you made like a check with your, it wasn't an Arcana check, which they could have made it in an Arcana check, but it wasn't it was basically make a check with your spellcasting ability modifier, and then you would see how you did. It is now a Constitution saving throw. So investing in Constitution saving throws is even more so beneficial to spellcasters who want to not be counterspelled. I also wonder if Warcaster, the feat, will be adjusted to give you advantage on these Constitution saving throws as well. That could be interesting. I'm fine with the change to Constitution saving throw. The spell modifier check, while I didn't think it was that complicated, I could see how for newer players, because it was a unique instance of this spell alone. But I think Dispel Magic, as we know, is still basically the same. That's fine. Constitution saving throw, I'm okay with that. What I don't like is that it doesn't expend they're basically saying the purpose of Counterspell is to interrupt the action of casting the spell, essentially wasting their action, bonus action, or reaction, but they still retain the spell slot. And I'm not sure how I feel about this. Because, all right, so let's say, there also is no benefit of upcasting it now, as you notice. You can't upcast it. So it's a Constitution saving throw. So whether you cast it with a 9th level spell or a 3rd level spell, it's no different. So there's something to be said with that, whereas you're not losing, you don't have to worry about saving higher level slots to knock out lower level spells. But, if I'm like, hey, you're going to cast your 7th level spell to teleport, I'll counterspell it. You make the Constitution saving throw and you fail. Cool, I stopped you from teleporting this turn. And then I guess basically now the party has a turn before it gets back to you in the initiative to just Nova you down to the point where you're gone. Otherwise, you're just going to use that 7th level spell slot to teleport again. And if I'm out of counter spells, or, spell slots in which to cast Counterspell, then I can't do anything about it. I interrupted the usage of you casting it. It does also still benefit from reactionary counterspelling. A counterspell does still work with this mechanic here as well. You can still do that, but the spell slot isn't lost. And I think it was mentioned in one of the videos that I watched where Jeremy Crawford was talking about it, and he said this was kind of their initial design intent, was that it interrupts the action of casting the spell, not necessarily expending the usage of it. But I think that's a little too much power for the caster, I guess, right? So let's read the design note, right? Now requires the target to make a saving throw instead of requiring the caster to make an ability check. The spell's previous design failed to account for the capabilities of the target, which is rectified by the new design. The new design also specifies that the countered spell must be cast with spell components, and if the countered spell uses a spell slot, that spell slot isn't expended. Meaning that if you have something like Subtle Spell, it specifically states that you cannot counterspell it because it doesn't have those components, which is an interesting thing. Also, if the creature has some sort of psionic ability that allows them to cast the spell without components, it can't be counterspelled. it feels like it's not enough. Like, I don't know. In my head, I can't formulate my thoughts around this. I'm just a little flustered by it. Like, I'm shutting you down, but I guess that ultimately does stop you, and it could add some more tension to the fight, right? I stopped you from teleporting this turn with a counterspell. Maybe now, like I said, now we know we have a turn to try to get you to stop, to find a way to stop you from teleporting again, because we know you still have the ability to do so. So there's that, right? That's part of the concept of it. So it adds that extra degree of tension in the combat. It also is, again, for the other way, right? So, and that was kind of the design process I heard from what they had said in the video as well, is that they didn't want you to feel like the DM is specifically targeting you to be a jerk, because you're like, hey, I cast this counterspell, and the DM counterspells you, and then like now that spell slot's gone, and then you go to do something, and I counterspell you. And like I can continue to counterspell you, just interrupting you. It'll still make it frustrating for you, but eventually I will run out of counterspells and you will still have access to your abilities. I won't basically just shut you down completely. And I get that that's a little bit of a, allowing the players to not be feel like they're completely targeted and specifically shut down by the DM, because you do still have your resources and spell slots. I'll have to play test it. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on this one specifically. I'm very curious where you land on the adjustments to Counterspell. Uh, my gut is I don't like it, but I think I could be, you know what? I mean, maybe it depends on what side of it you're on, right? As the DM counterspelling somebody, this probably feels better for the player, but as the player counterspelling a monster, probably doesn't feel as good, and that might just be the give and take of how it goes. I don't know. But your spell slot is still expended if I go to counterspell you and it doesn't work. So it says on a fail, the spell dissipates with no effect. So I'm still expending my spell slot to attempt to counterspell you. Whereas if you succeed, you might not lose the slot. That might also be factored into the decision, should I counterspell this, should I not? Like I said, I'll have to actually sit at a table and playtest this rule to see how it feels. The other big one that I think is a big win is Eldritch Blast and Hex were reverted to their 2014 versions. They had a big change to Hex. Nobody liked the way it worked. It was like it only worked on one attack, and it had an upcast mechanic. Eldritch Blast also was specifically tied to your Warlock level, whereas now you could basically be 3 levels in Warlock and 12 levels in Fighter and cast essentially the 15th level version of Eldritch Blast, allowing you to shoot 3 blasts, stuff like that. It was basically on like aggregate character level was when your cantrips leveled up, and then Eldritch Blast they were specifically changing to be tied to Warlock. That one I was okay with, right? It's going to stop a lot of people doing a 1-level dip into Warlock to just get Eldritch Blast, or to, take a Magic Initiate feat to get Eldritch Blast, because it's one of the best cantrips in the game, and it's very powerful, especially because it can be cast at multiple targets. So I don't know. I think I'm okay with this reversion. Jump was a big change. It has now been shifted to a bonus action. Its target must be willing, and it no longer relies on strength or speed and can be improved at a higher level. It says, once on each of its turn until the spell ends, the creature can jump up to 30 feet by only spending 10 feet of movement, which is a huge change. So if you have a 30 feet of movement, you spend 10 feet to jump 30, and you'd still have your remaining initial 20 feet. And then again, if you cast it from a higher level spell slot, you can target one additional creature, which is nice. This definitely feels like Baldur's Gate 3 may have had a little bit of impact on this. I think this is huge. Jump was basically not used at all. This is a massive improvement. I like this a lot. And then again, the very simple change here is Sorceress Burst, as you can see here, which was the cantrip. For Sorcerers, it was adjusted up from D6s to D8s, which makes it that much more useful. So there you go, folks. That's your TLDR version. I know this was a little bit long, but Counterspell, really, I wanted to drive that home and get your opinion on that. So let me know your thoughts and opinions on the changes to spells for this Unearthed Arcana, as well as thank you to Ryoku's Guide to the Yokai Realms for sponsoring this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.